Ethnography or ethnographic research is one of the most important qualitative types of research. We already have a lecture in this space that defines and gives the general characteristics of qualitative of ethnographic research. The current presentation is aimed at explaining ethnographic research, elaborating ethnographic research with an example. So first, let us have an overview of the general definition of ethnographic research. Ethnographic research generally is a qualitative research method that explores and understands cultures and social practices and daily lives of specific groups or communities. Generally, the researchers or the ethnographers engage directly with the environments that they want to study or that they want to explore. As a result, most important methods of data collection involve observations or personal participant observations of the researchers, interviews with people from the cultural group, and analysis of cultural artifacts and documents. And the aim of this is to actually capture the lived experiences and unique aspects of the group that is under study. Now, here is an example of ethnographic research. For example, if a sociologist is interested in understanding a particular group, such as the Kailash people, which is a distinct cultural group in Pakistan, they can come up with this particular topic. For example, the preservation of indigenous identity, an ethnographic study of the Kailash people in Pakistan. So here, the researcher or the researchers are interested in understanding how, for example, the Kailash people maintain their cultural identity in the face of modernization and external influences. So this could be one of the first important research questions. Secondly, what role, for example, do rituals, festivals, and cultural practices play in preserving Kailash traditions? And thirdly, how do Kailash youth, for example, perceive their indigenous heritage and its relevance to their modern lives? And lastly, another important question that could be included in this study is that what challenges do the Kailash face in terms of cultural preservation and integration with mainstream Pakistani society? So as a subgroup of the Pakistani society, this particular cultural group, what do they do? What challenges do they face in terms of preserving their cultures and at the same time integrating, because both preservations and integrations are important for a particular minority cultural group. So these are important questions that the ethnography researchers are interested in this particular case. Now, the research design is basically ethnographic study, and this actually means that there will be extended field work that will be conducted in the Kailash Valley. Similarly, there could be focus on documenting the cultural practices, integrational dynamics, intergenerational dynamics, and interactions with external influences. So, what are the cultural practices that the Kailash people try to preserve and to carry on? How these practices, these cultural practices, are transferred and transformed from one generation to another generation, and the interactions with external influences. So, how external cultural or political or economic influences impact these practices. Now, the participants could be the elders in that particular area, the cultural leaders, artisans, women, and youth from Kailash community. So it depends on what type of data actually the researcher, and what do they consider as, whom do they consider as the important sources of data. Key informants or the data sources would generally include community leaders. They would include festival organizers, for example, the various festivals that people organize. So those organizers will be considered as people who will have in-depth knowledge related to those cultural practices. And educators as well, because generally educators are people who transfer the cultural practices of particular societies from one generation to another generation. Data collection generally in ethnographic studies include data using observations. So participant observation, where the researcher observes but at the same time takes part in those cultural practices, is one of the most important types of data collection tools or process in ethnographic research. So for example, the participants might attend and document or record Kailash festivals such as like the Chilam Joshi or Koimas. Similarly, they might observe daily life activities of the Kailash people, such as their traditional dress making. So how do they make those traditional dresses, their farming practices, and their communal gatherings. Besides participant observation, another important data source is data collection method could be semi-structured interviews. So interviews with elders, with people who have knowledge and historical background of these cultural practices. Similarly, the youth who take part in these cultural practices. So these are some of the sources that could be interviewed for additional and maybe for triangulation of the data that one gets through observation or participant observation. Similarly, in some cases, focus group discussions where the participants are recruited in the form of groups, and then those focus groups, they discuss particular aspects of the cultures. And so focus group discussion, it has its strengths that could aid to further enhancements of the insights of the researcher regarding the questions that they want to answer through the data. Similarly, artifacts and symbolism analysis. So for example, in this case, Kailash architecture, traditional attire, and crafts could be analyzed to understand cultural symbolism. So what do those dresses or the particular designs of dresses and the particular designs of their attires and crafts could be studied in order to understand those and the meaning that they carry in those cultural contexts. So once data is collected through participant observation, through semi-structured interviews, and through focus group discussions, and through the analysis of the documents, the next thing is data analysis. So generally, qualitative data is analyzed using thematic analysis, where main themes are explored that come through the data. For example, in this case, key themes could be resilience, where the cultural group shows resilience in terms of preserving their culture and promoting their culture despite the changes that are happening around them, the external pressures. And there could also be a theme related to generational shift, or the shift of their particular culture to the next generations. In order to triangulate data, there could be you can say authentication of data by comparing and contrasting and analyzing data from observations and interviews and artifact analysis. So this will increase the validity and reliability of the findings. Also, we need to have an ethical consideration section in this particular research. Ethics is an important aspect of every research. Unethical research practices will actually lead to the invalidation of the research. So, for example, seeking permission from the local community before you start the research process or the data collection process. Secondly, the researchers need to respect the cultural norms and values, and they need to avoid intrusive questioning. And this is important to conduct your research based on ethical conduct. And also there is need for maintaining anonymity and confidentiality of the participants in order to make sure that they are safe and that the data that they give is actually authentic. Lastly, we could also include in this research design the expected outcomes. So, for example, in this case, expected outcomes of our study will be an offshoot of our research questions. So, as our research questions actually are related to getting insight into the adaptive strategies used by the Kailash to preserve the unique culture. So, it is expected that this research will tell us, will give us insights into what strategies the Kailash people use to preserve their culture. Similarly, this research could also help us in understanding the impact of external forces, modernization, such as tourism and modernization on the Kailash identity. And lastly, this research could result in giving recommendations for policies to support the cultural diversity, the cultural heritage, the preservation and the promotion of sustainable tourism in this particular area, that is the Kailash area, and the preservation of the Kailash culture.